Alright, so if you own an AR-15, this is probably one of the most important videos for you. There are a lot of videos explaining out there why you should run this cartridge or that cartridge out of your AR without a whole lot of explanation. It's just real base information. So, there's a couple caveats. Number one, we're going to be taking numbers from all 20-inch barrels to learn how the cartridge itself performs, not how the cartridge performs in your rifle. Each rifle is an individual, and you'll need to test it and do your own testing to make sure all the data lines up to what you are actually looking for. Number two, you need to understand M193 has been neutered lately. I don't know why. The best of my knowledge has started shortly after the ammo shortage started. I discovered this by complete mistake. Basically, the chain of events that had happened for me to discover this is, number one, I was shooting at a steel plate. Let me go grab it real quick. Shooting at this steel plate, this side, and I was just creating little divots with M193, and I'm like, what the shit? At the velocity I'm at, I should be going like a quarter to halfway into this plate. I literally took the rifle like this, basically put the muzzle on the plate, kind of shielded my face, boom! Like with the muzzle more or less touching this plate. It still only created a divot. So I'm like, okay, that's a little bit weird. And then I went and tested this rifle against the Colt match to see what the accuracy difference was like, to see if you could build a rifle better than Colt could. And my point of impact was like 3 MOA low. I'm like, damn, that's weird. So then I chronographed it, and yeah, sure as shit. $27.50. $28.47. Yeah, $45. $28.08. Yeah, so if that's got really low velocity, it's flying at like 2850, I could run M855 through there and get more velocity out of it. I have no idea why the 55 grain's been neutered, but make sure to buy a small amount, chrono it, make sure it's actually performing how M193 should perform, and then buy it, because I have a pile of M193 that flies out of this rifle at like 2,800 feet per second. That's why I haven't really shot this rifle a lot. This is one of my favorite rifles to shoot, and as you notice, I haven't made videos because I don't know what to do. I have all this ammunition that's underperforming, and this rifle is set up specifically for M193. Alright, so that caveat's out there. Then, at the end of this video, I'm going to bring up a cartridge that's probably not on your radar that has some very unusual advantages. I'll cover the main three: M193, M855, and then Mark 262. And then at the end, we're going to talk about the special cartridge you need to know about. Alright, so let's go over the stats of why you may or may not want to run a particular cartridge. First off, muzzle velocity. For the M193, you got 3250. For the M855, you got 3020. Then the Mark 262, you got 2,750. Again, remember, this is out of 20-inch barrel numbers. I randomly pulled numbers off the internet. Your particular ammunition may fly a little bit different. Your particular rifle may shoot the same ammunition different than everybody else's rifles. You got to chronograph it yourself, to get a realistic idea of where the performance is. Now, the first most important number when you're talking about a bullet this size is 2,200 feet per second. Now, I've tried explaining this in several videos. Every time I do, I get nothing but a whole bunch of comments telling me I don't know what the hell I'm talking about and to don't quit my day job, etc., etc., etc. So I'm just going to let the professional explain it. You can argue with him.
Temporary wound cavity, as we expand and recover from, is different when projectiles hit at greater than 2,200 feet a second. At that point, it appears we have surpassed the elasticity capability of human tissue, and that temporary wound cavity begins tearing at its limits and margins and becomes the permanent wound cavity, which also is the conclusion why people who are center punched with rifle projectiles typically succumb much quicker than people who are hit with handgun projectiles. The byproduct of that also seems that when a rifle projectile at those velocities bypasses an organ, you will still have organic damage, whereas a handgun projectile needs to directly hit a vital organ to do organic damage.
That is why 2,200 feet per second is incredibly important, especially with 5.56, because these are so small and so light. Once you lose the ability to create that hydro shock, it really neuters the cartridge. I mean, it really kind of takes a big old poopy once it drops below 2,200 feet per second. So, where do these specific cartridges perform out to 2,200 feet per second? For M193, you got 300 yards. That's nice. That's a really good distance. M855, 200 yards. 262, 200 yards. Okay, so obviously, because of how a 5.56 performs, it is ideal to be above 2,200 feet per second, so the one that can stay above 2,200 feet per second the longest is going to be the best cartridge for that particular range. So out to 300 yards, M193 is the king. That is the cartridge to pick. Obviously, chronograph it, make sure it's actually performing like it's supposed to. So, we got M193, the king, out to 300 yards. Well, what about past that? Like, what are you going to start looking for cartridges then? Alright, so let's start looking at some of the stats. Once you're past 300 yards, then kinetic energy starts to come into play. So what about 400 yards? What do we have for kinetic energy? We have, for the M193, 516. For the 855, 517. That's not enough difference to make a difference. 1 foot-pound of kinetic energy, it's completely negligible. And then we got 596 for the 262. You can debate in the comments section whether that extra 80 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, which I'm pretty sure a pellet gun produces more than, is actually going to make a real-world difference on an impact. Alright, so what about 500 yards? And remember, at 400, if you have more than a 5-mile-an-hour wind and you're aiming center mass, you're going to miss. So for me, at least, at 300, because that's like the last distance where I can take a strong wind and still aim center mass and get a reliable hit, I'm going to want to switch to something else. I mean, literally, like a 308, a 6.5 Creedmoor, there are so many better cartridges that perform. 6.5 Grendel, like any of those outperform the 5.56 past 300 yards. So for me, at least, the 5.56 is dead at 300. If I know I'm going to be shooting farther than 300, I'm picking a different cartridge. So anyway, what about 500? What do we got for kinetic energy then? We got 398 with the M193. We got 403 with the M855. Still, the M855 does not have an advantage over the M193 because it has very similar kinetic energy. There is no difference there. We're looking at 10 extra foot-pounds of kinetic energy. Now, here's where the 262 starts coming into play here. We got 475. Almost 100 more foot-pounds over the M193 at 500 yards. That sounds great, right? Like, you're like, okay, I want the most foot-pounds. I'm shooting 500 yards, so I would go with the 262. There's a catch to this. So, alright, we already know if we have more than a 5-mile-an-hour wind, I think even at 500 it's like a 2 or a 3-mile-an-hour wind. I'll have to double check. I'll post a little picture right here. The purple lines are your wind. I think more like a 2-mile-an-hour wind you're missing. So, I personally would not be shooting a 5.56 at 500. But let's say I did. Let's say I did and I am in some magic world where wind doesn't exist. Well, the next variable to think about is drop. Because if I call my range wrong and gravity is consistent, how much is my projectile going to drop to where that would cause a miss? And it works in the other way too. Let's pretend I'm shooting 400 and I think it's a 500-yard distance. If I'm using a cartridge that has a whole bunch of drop, I'm going to be making more clicks on my scope. Therefore, I'm going to miss by. So I'm aiming center mass. I think it's 500, but I call it at 400, so I got a 500 dope on there. So I'm shooting above my target. The less drop you have, the easier it is for you to make shots at that distance. So for M193, we have 6.8 MOA, which is what, about 34 inches. So this is 34 inches right here. We're going to pretend I don't even touch my drop. I just aim at the target, 500 yards, I pull the trigger. I will not be in the vitals. I will not be in the stomach. I'll be in the kneecaps. Still a hit. That's not bad. That's not bad at all. I'm still getting a hit. And that's the most important thing. Making contact on your target, stopping them from doing whatever the hell they're doing that made you decide to pull the trigger. Okay, what about M855? What do we got for drop there? 10 MOA, or 50 inches. 50 inches, center mass, I'm in the dirt. I'm shooting 2 or 3 feet in front of them and it's hitting the dirt. Maybe I'll get lucky and it'll bounce off the ground and fly into the target. Alright, so what about 262? We are looking at 11.6 MO8 or 58 inches. Roughly. So that's right here, and the tape measure's touching the ground, so if I aim center mass, I am definitely in the dirt. Now they could, it's not, I mean, it could still bounce off the ground and into your target, but it's not going to. That's so far ahead, it would have to have a straight path after it bounces, and it's not. It's going to wind up picking some, the odds of it hitting a target after it hitting the dirt that far ahead of the target, just not realistic. So, what did we learn? We learned that M193 outperforms the other cartridges basically everywhere, except for M855A1, because they juiced it up to M193 velocities, but you get the BC of the 262. Now, from what I understand, they're having problems with the cartridge. They haven't worked out all the bugs yet, but when they do, that is going to be the ultimate 5.56 cartridge. Right now, it's the M193, assuming your M193 actually performs how it says on the box. If it's coming out of the barrel, a 20-inch barrel, at 3250, yes, it will outperform these other ones. If it's one of those neutered ones that are coming out of the barrel at like 28, no, these other ones will walk circles around it. So make sure you're actually getting 3250 for velocity. Very important with the M193, because even with the lower BC of the 284, and this is the 262 as 373, it still outperforms these out to 500 yards. You have less drop. It arrives at your target quicker. It's more lethal 100 yards farther because it will be more lethal out to 300 yards, where these are only more lethal out to 200 yards. No matter what, you're screwed with the wind either way. I mean, there's no getting around it. So, now what is this secret cartridge I'm talking about? How is this one relevant? This would be the 45 grain 223. This flies out of your barrel at 3,600 feet per second. When something is moving that quick inside of like 50 yards, because it's a very short, stubby projectile, so it doesn't have the BC to hang on for a long range, so that's very close quarters. Like 50 yards is where it's super devastating. Otherwise, the M193 ultimately takes precedence. I think at like 100 yards is when it starts outperforming the 45 grain, and the 45 grain sure as shit doesn't hold 2,200 out to 300 yards. I'll double check that on the interweb and post it right here, but I'm like 99% sure it just doesn't have the BC to hold that velocity to 300 yards. So inside of like 50 yards, it's crazy devastating because it's so light and so quick. When it hits, it doesn't get much penetration, still enough to obviously get in the vitals, but it just explodes and destroys everything in its way. Like you're talking like a pop can size wound cavity. It's bad. Now the pop can may be a slight exaggeration, but I'm talking about like the circle circumference. So say it enters here and the bottom of the wound cavity goes here from the bullet going sideways and that. Like you're looking at destruction of like a pop can inside your target. Now what makes this super special, it cannot take down level 3 ceramic, However, your level 3 your level 3 steel, inside of 50 yards, it just pops right through. Now we have some 45 grade 223. This is supposed to be moving up around 3,600 feet per second. This is a threat to that plate. Let's see if it'll stop it. I don't know if it will because it is a hollow point, so we'll find out. .45 grain 223 passed right through without a problem. I tested it all the way out to 100 and I couldn't get penetration at 100, but out to 50 yards, not a problem. Zipped right through it like a hot knife through butter. So that is one cartridge in 223 you're going to want to put on your radar. If you design a gun specifically for shooting, this 45 grain 223, like put it in a 20-inch barrel and make that gun like this is what I'm shooting with that gun will be absolutely devastating inside of 50 yards, even against armor. It'll just rip crap off. If I would have hit that ceramic armor twice, I would have went through. I almost guarantee it. Maybe it wouldn't have, but I almost guarantee it would have went through. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope if you didn't find this video educational, you actually found it just a little bit entertaining. If you like to help support the channel, I got my Patreon right there, and I also have affiliate links in the description down below. Just by clicking on those links, even if you don't purchase what that particular link is for, just clicking on that, and then doing the Amazon shopping you were already going to do anyway. And a little kickback for it because you came there off my channel. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.